The blood-stained highway, a patch, a name, a stretch of highway. Three simple things that would ignite one of the most violent biker wars in American history. When bullets started flying in parking lots across the East Coast, when FBI surveillance vans became permanent fixtures outside clubhouses, when body counts began rising from Philadelphia to Petersburg, the message was clear. This wasn't just about motorcycles anymore. For decades, two notorious motorcycle clubs carved up the eastern United States like a chessboard of violence. The Pagans Motorcycle Club and the Outlaws MC didn't just ride these roads, they owned them. Every bar, every town, every mile of asphalt represented power, money, and respect. And when those invisible lines got crossed, people died. Federal courtrooms would later reveal the terrifying truth. Coordinated ambushes, military-style operations, and a network of violence that reached into organized crime itself. This was war disguised as brotherhood. What you're about to hear actually happened. Real shootouts, real bodies, real federal cases that exposed how deep the darkness goes when territory becomes everything. The rise of two empires, Prince George's County, Maryland, 1959. The Pagans Motorcycle Club roared to life as a small group of speed-obsessed bikers chasing freedom on two wheels. But by the 1960s, something sinister had taken root. The innocent hobby club transformed into something law enforcement would later classify as one of America's most violent criminal organizations. Their expansion was methodical, calculated, deadly. From New Jersey to Florida, through the heart of Appalachian territory, they planted their flag in over a dozen states. The ATF would eventually brand them a major criminal threat, tied to organized crime, drug trafficking, weapons offenses, and savage assaults that left victims permanently scarred. The Pagans developed a unique recruitment strategy that set them apart from other motorcycle clubs. They actively sought out military veterans, ex-convicts, and individuals with specialized skills in violence and intimidation. Their screening process was brutal. Prospective members underwent hazing rituals that tested their loyalty through acts of criminal participation. Only those willing to spill blood for the Brotherhood earned their patches. Their clubhouses became fortresses. Reinforced doors, surveillance cameras, and hidden weapons caches turned seemingly ordinary buildings into military compounds. Members lived by strict rules: no cooperation with law enforcement, absolute loyalty to the club hierarchy, and immediate retaliation against any perceived slight. Their colors told the story: denim and black leather adorned with the Surtur patch, a Norse fire god wielding a magic sword. It wasn't fashion. It was a promise of what happened to those who stood in their way. Meanwhile, in Illinois during the mid-1960s, another beast was awakening. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club, also known as the American Outlaws Association, emerged as one of the original Big Four outlaw clubs in America. Their grinning skull logo, nicknamed Charlie, became a death's head warning to anyone foolish enough to cross their path. The Outlaws' organizational structure resembled a criminal corporation more than a motorcycle club. They established sophisticated communication networks, financial systems for laundering drug money, and legal defense funds that could mobilize high-powered attorneys within hours of any arrest. Their leadership understood that longevity required more than just violence. It demanded intelligence and strategic planning. Unlike the Pagans' regional focus, the Outlaws built an empire. Chapters sprouted across the country and even crossed oceans into Europe. Their resume read like a criminal encyclopedia: extortion, drug trafficking, firearms crimes, and violent hate crimes that terrorized communities from coast to coast. The club's international connections provided access to weapons trafficking networks that spanned multiple continents. European chapters facilitated smuggling operations that brought military-grade firearms into American cities, while domestic chapters distributed them through underground markets that law enforcement struggled to penetrate. For years, these two titans operated in separate spheres. The Pagans dominated the East Coast, while the Outlaws controlled the Midwest and pushed south. Both clubs shared a common enemy in the Hells Angels, creating an uneasy alliance of convenience. But empires have a way of colliding when they grow too large. In Virginia, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas, their territories began to bleed into each other. What started as occasional encounters at rallies and bars evolved into something far more dangerous. Power, pride, and profit created a toxic cocktail that would soon explode across the eastern seaboard. When enemies first locked eyes, the summer of 2009 in Petersburg, Virginia, would mark the beginning of open warfare. A local bar became ground zero for what authorities would later describe as a carefully orchestrated assassination attempt. When members of both the Outlaws and Pagans arrived that night, they weren't there for drinks. They came armed, organized, and ready to send a message written in blood. Their targets, members of the Hells Angels and Desperados, two clubs that had earned the hatred of both organizations. What unfolded inside that bar wasn't a random fight. It was military precision applied to civilian space. Baseball bats cracked skulls, brass knuckles shattered bones. Then the guns came out. Police arrived to find weapons scattered across the floor and several bikers bleeding on the ground. The arrests that followed revealed something chilling. This had been planned for weeks, but the seeds of violence had been planted years earlier. Federal intelligence from 2006 had already flagged the collision course these clubs were on. The Pagans, traditionally dominant in the Northeast, were pushing south. The Outlaws, secure in their Midwest stronghold, were expanding east. Every mile of highway they both claimed brought them closer to inevitable conflict. The psychological warfare began before the physical violence. Both clubs started employing intimidation tactics designed to weaken their opponent's resolve. Pagans members would appear at Outlaws-controlled bars in large numbers, not to start fights, but to demonstrate their presence and challenge territorial claims. The Outlaws responded with similar shows of force, creating an atmosphere of constant tension. Intelligence operations became crucial to both organizations. They recruited bartenders, waitresses, and local residents as informal spies who could report on rival activities. Phone numbers were tracked, license plates were memorized, and detailed dossiers were compiled on enemy members. This information warfare laid the groundwork for the physical confrontations that would follow. A motorsports rally in Dinwiddie County, Virginia, nearly became a massacre when over 50 members from various clubs, Pagans, Outlaws, and Hells Angels, converged in the same area. Only the rapid intervention of local law enforcement prevented what could have been the largest biker shootout in Virginia history. The rally incident revealed how sophisticated their coordination had become. Both clubs had established command structures that could mobilize dozens of members across multiple states within hours. Communication networks using encrypted radio frequencies and coded language allowed leaders to direct movements without law enforcement detection. Behind the scenes, both organizations were experiencing internal power struggles that made violence more likely. Leadership changes brought younger, more aggressive members to positions of authority. Some chapters favored diplomacy. Others thirsted for war. Across Delaware, New Jersey, and Maryland, the warning signs multiplied. Clubhouse windows were shattered in midnight raids. Roadside confrontations left riders hospitalized. Invisible boundaries were drawn through communities, enforced by fear and brutality. Each incident was a test, each retaliation an escalation. Law enforcement watched helplessly as two criminal empires moved toward open war, knowing that when the shooting finally started, innocent people would be caught in the crossfire. The federal hammer falls, June 2010. The ATF had seen enough. Operation Black Rain crashed down like thunder across 7 states, targeting the heart of the Outlaws' criminal empire. 27 members found themselves in federal custody, facing charges that could put them away for life: racketeering, attempted murder, kidnapping, firearms trafficking, and drug distribution. Court documents revealed a chilling picture of organized violence. These weren't random acts of brutality. They were coordinated military-style operations designed to eliminate rivals and expand territory. Members traveled hundreds of miles to carry out specific hits, following orders that came from the highest levels of club leadership. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed planned ambushes. Wiretaps captured assassination plots. Informants revealed the internal structure of a criminal organization that operated like a shadow military unit. But the Outlaws weren't the only ones in federal crosshairs. By 2018, the Pagans found themselves under similar scrutiny. Indictments rained down across New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. High-ranking officers, men who had spent decades building their criminal empire, were charged with firearms violations, narcotics trafficking, and violent assaults that had terrorized communities for years. These weren't street-level dealers getting caught with drugs. These were the architects of a criminal network that stretched across state lines, involving millions of dollars and countless victims. The Missouri expansion of 2022 to 2024 proved that federal pressure hadn't dampened the Pagans' appetite for territory. Moving into Grain Valley, Topeka, and Blue Springs brought them directly into established Outlaws territory once again. The violence that followed was swift and savage. Prosecutors would later reveal that a Pagan chapter president led a broad daylight assault inside a public restaurant, using guns, bats, and axe handles to hospitalize multiple victims. The attack wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, coordinated, and executed with the precision of a military operation. RICO charges, the same legal weapon used against the mafia, became the government's tool of choice. These cases allowed prosecutors to target entire organizations rather than individual criminals, exposing the vast criminal networks that connected bikers across multiple states. Phone records revealed the sophisticated communication systems these clubs used: burner phones, encrypted messages, and coded language designed to avoid detection. But federal technology was catching up, and surveillance capabilities that once seemed like science fiction were now standard investigative tools. Even as members took plea deals and others received lengthy prison sentences, both organizations adapted and survived. Their structure was too deep, their loyalty too strong, and their profits too lucrative to simply disappear. The war was far from over. Streets running, Red Albany, New York, 2021. What should have been another quiet night at an illegal after-hours club became a scene from a war zone. 73 shots fired in seconds. The mathematical precision of that number would haunt investigators for months. It suggested multiple shooters, coordinated timing, and a level of planning that elevated this beyond a simple bar fight. When the gunfire stopped, a 35-year-old father lay dead on the floor. He had no connection to any motorcycle club, no criminal record, no enemies. His only crime was being in the wrong place when hell erupted around him. Police recovered dozens of shell casings, multiple weapons, and security footage that captured the horror in real time. Yet, despite overwhelming evidence, the code of silence held. No witnesses came forward. No one saw anything. Fear had transformed an entire community into unwilling accomplices. The investigation would eventually link the shooting to Pagan members seeking revenge for a previous slight. But the victim was just collateral damage in a war he never knew existed. North Carolina, 2023. The Department of Justice unsealed indictments that read like a crime novel, but the blood was real. Members of the Outlaws and Hells Angels faced murder charges, attempted murder, and racketeering for a coordinated campaign against Pagan members who had dared to expand into their territory. The Dairy Queen parking lot in Raleigh became an execution site when multiple bikers followed a Pagan member in broad daylight, opened fire, and disappeared before witnesses could even process what they'd seen. Days later, another Pagan associate was gunned down outside a convenience store in a nearly identical attack. Federal investigators discovered that these murders weren't crimes of passion. They were business decisions. The killers had tracked their targets for weeks, using encrypted messaging to coordinate routes and timing. They knew where their victims worked, where they lived, and where they were vulnerable. 16 members of the Hells Angels and their affiliate Red Devils found themselves in federal custody. But law enforcement suspected they had only scratched the surface. The Pagans had undoubtedly retaliated in ways that hadn't yet come to light. Palm Bay, Florida, provided another glimpse into the escalating violence. Police responding to a disturbance outside a local bar found multiple shooting victims, shell casings scattered across the parking lot, and bikers fleeing in all directions. Among the wounded was a known Outlaws associate. Federal agents later confirmed that both clubs had been monitoring each other's movements through local contacts and informants. The confrontation had been building for weeks, triggered by something as simple as a disrespectful comment made in public and an unauthorized ride through claimed territory. The message was unmistakable. Respect was everything, and disrespect was paid for in blood. Main streets, restaurants, parking lots, nowhere was safe when these clubs decided to settle scores. The underground economy of violence. Every bullet fired, every life taken, every federal raid exposed a darker truth about what these clubs were really fighting over. This wasn't just about respect or territory. It was about controlling a shadow economy worth millions. The Mid-Atlantic corridor belonged to the Pagans. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware represented more than just geography. They were profit centers, bar security contracts, methamphetamine and cocaine distribution routes, illegal weapons sales, and clubhouse dominance created revenue streams that legitimate businesses could never match. The financial sophistication of these operations rivaled Wall Street corporations. Money laundering schemes involved legitimate businesses, real estate investments, and complex financial instruments that made tracking difficult. Cash from drug sales moved through car dealerships, construction companies, and restaurants owned by club members or their associates. Protection rackets generated steady income from businesses throughout their territories. Bar owners, restaurant managers, and small business operators paid monthly fees to ensure their establishments remained free from harassment, vandalism, or worse. Those who refused faced escalating intimidation until compliance became the only viable option. The weapons trafficking component proved especially lucrative and dangerous. Both clubs maintained connections to military personnel, law enforcement officers, and private gun dealers willing to provide firearms without proper documentation. These weapons often ended up in the hands of other criminal organizations, creating a web of violence that extended far beyond motorcycle clubs. The Outlaws controlled their own empire, stretching from the Midwest through Florida, with tentacles reaching up the East Coast. As their territories converged, conflict became inevitable. Drug manufacturing and distribution required sophisticated logistics networks. Both clubs operated mobile laboratories capable of producing methamphetamine and other substances in remote locations, then moving operations before law enforcement could respond. Quality control, territory protection, and customer loyalty became matters of life and death. Biker bars weren't just social gatherings, they were command centers. Whoever controlled them decided who entered, what products were sold, and what messages were communicated. A simple ride through rival territory without permission wasn't just disrespectful. It was a direct challenge to economic control. Federal investigations revealed that the Pagans had cultivated relationships with East Coast organized crime families, including connections to Philadelphia mafia groups. These alliances provided muscle and political protection, while helping them resist expansion attempts by larger clubs like the Hells Angels. The labor unions became another battleground where both clubs sought influence and control. Construction projects, trucking operations, and port activities offered opportunities for legitimate employment that could provide cover for criminal activities while generating additional revenue streams. The Outlaws operated their own network of alliances, guarding their territory with legendary brutality. Cities like Cincinnati, Tampa, and Indianapolis remained under their absolute control, but the Pagan southern expansion into North and South Carolina created new pressure points. Both organizations operated with military-style hierarchy and discipline. Presidents issued orders that flowed down through sergeants-at-arms to enforcers and patched members. When retaliation was required, it happened within days, carried out by members who understood that failure meant exile, or worse. Federal raids exposed the sophistication of their operations. Hidden rooms and clubhouses contained weapons caches that would make military units envious. Illegal firearms, silencers, grenades, and bulletproof vests. Cash counting rooms, drug packaging facilities, and sophisticated surveillance systems revealed organizations that operated like corporations. The human resources were equally impressive. Many members were career criminals or ex-military personnel who brought professional skills to criminal enterprises. Their code of silence and loyalty made infiltration nearly impossible and prosecution extraordinarily difficult. At its core, the war between the Pagans and Outlaws was about economic control of the East Coast's underground economy. Every act of violence was a business decision designed to protect market share and eliminate competition. The calculation of chaos. To outside observers, the violence appeared random and senseless, but within the rigid structure of outlaw motorcycle clubs, every action followed a precise logic of power and consequence. Territory equaled power. Power generated money. Money bought influence and protection. This simple equation drove every decision, every retaliation, every expansion into new markets. Neither emotion nor impulse guided these conflicts. When a rival club's member appeared in the wrong bar wearing the wrong colors, it wasn't personal, it was business. When recruitment efforts targeted another club's traditional territory, it represented economic warfare disguised as brotherhood. Each organization maintained strict hierarchies, where major decisions required approval from leadership. Retaliation might not be immediate, but it was inevitable. Members followed codes that prioritized loyalty above personal safety and silence above legal cooperation. The Pagans' aggressive East Coast expansion strategy during recent years involved patching over smaller local clubs or systematically driving them out of business. This direct challenge to established territorial agreements made conflict with nearby outlaws chapters unavoidable. Both sides underestimated their opponent's resolve and capacity for violence. Each expected the other to back down when faced with serious opposition. Neither did. The resulting escalation followed predictable patterns of action and reaction, with each side raising the stakes until federal intervention became inevitable. Internal club politics complicated these calculations. Different chapters had different appetites for violence, creating inconsistent responses to provocations. Some leaders favored diplomatic solutions, while others preferred decisive military action. The war wasn't chaos. It was controlled violence with clear objectives and strategic thinking. Every shooting, every ambush, every federal case represented moves in a larger game where the ultimate prize was control of the East Coast's criminal underworld. When the smoke clears. The casualties continue mounting even as federal pressure intensifies and courtrooms fill with former leaders. Keith Conan Richter, the Pagans' national president, received a prison sentence in 2021 for illegal firearm possession while on federal probation. His arrest marked the end of an era that had seen the club double its chapters and push deeper into hostile territory, igniting violence across multiple states. Christopher Sled. Baker followed his leader into federal custody in 2023, sentenced after authorities discovered multiple illegal firearms and encrypted messages coordinating targeted assaults on rival club members. The digital evidence revealed sophisticated planning that contradicted any image of spontaneous violence. The Outlaws faced similar decimation of their leadership structure. Multi-state operations dismantled entire chapters, arresting high-ranking members connected to murder-for-hire plots and systematic intimidation campaigns. But like a hydra, new leadership emerged to replace the fallen, ensuring organizational survival. Across Delaware, Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida, the colors still fly. Clubhouses still operate. Territories remain contested. Law enforcement agencies now treat biker activity like organized crime investigations, rather than simple assault cases. But the fundamental dynamics haven't changed. Surveillance continues around the clock. Undercover operations penetrate deeper into club structures. Federal prosecutors prepare new cases using evidence gathered over years of patient investigation. But the war endures because the underlying economics haven't changed. Drug markets still generate massive profits. Territory still equals power. Respect still demands blood payment. The East Coast remains a battlefield divided between two wheels and two philosophies of violence. In backroom meetings and encrypted messages, plans are being made. Scores are being settled. New territories are being claimed. The road never ends. The war between the Pagans and Outlaws didn't begin with the first shot, fired, or end with the last arrest made. It lives in the shadows of every highway bar, every motorcycle rally, every chance encounter between riders wearing different colors. Federal agents continue building cases they hope will break these organizations permanently. Club members continue following codes of loyalty that prioritize brotherhood above law. Communities continue living in fear of violence that can erupt without warning in their neighborhoods. The patches, the territories, and the blood-stained highways tell a story that's far from finished. As long as there's money to be made and respect to be earned in the shadows of American roads, someone will be willing to fight for control. The question isn't whether the violence will stop, it's where it will surface next, and who will pay the price when it does. On the East Coast, the war continues, quietly, violently, relentlessly, and the road stretches on into darkness.